In the late 1960s, he offered to teach children in an inner-city Los Angeles school which had been wrecked after the Watts riots. He took a class in French for 1 week, but the students begged him to stay, and he remained for a month.
He teaches kids whose English is bad complicated French sentences in a couple of weeks. It was an enormous achievement. But what he really did was he turned them on intellectually. He made them feel like something. They could learn something. He gave them the sense of their own intelligence. And I think that's the secret of his whole approach, that he makes people feel smart. I couldn't speak a language, and goodness gracious, now I can. That makes you feel great. And his idea is you could do that with almost anything, and that human beings have a desperate, genetically coded desire to learn, and that all you've got to do is approach kids in the right way, and it works.
After such success, Michel expected that educationalists would knock on his door. Instead, he met with huge scepticism and resistance, partly because his method didn't fit into the academic mould.
What's distinctive about Michel is that the method is intrinsically connected with the person giving the instruction. And that is so alien to the conception of how a subject matter is taught that he was bound to meet with enormous resistance.
At the time he took Michel's Spanish course, Herbert Morris was Dean of Humanities at the University of California in Los Angeles and ran a department that taught over 80 foreign languages. He encouraged his professors to experiment with the method, but Michel's reluctance to share his technique was a problem.
He's never put in writing what he believes to be the essence of this method, and I think it's another reason why there was resistance, certainly at my academic institution, in adopting or even being prepared to experiment with what he was doing. They weren't really prepared particularly to listen to the tapes. They wanted him to describe, okay, what's so special about what you're doing? And if Michel wasn't prepared to tell them.
I think he had real fears early on that people were going to rip him off and steal the technique. He wasn't just going to hand it over to anybody for them to test it. People seem to say, oh, well, we'll test it, and then if it works, we'll come back to you. He wasn't going to do that. He wanted to be in control.
The educational establishment was left to form its own conclusions. Guy Cook is Professor of Linguistics at Reading University.
He says that it's a revolutionary new method, that he can teach you to learn an entire language in a few hours, that you'll be able to converse and think in the language like a native, and so on and so forth. So those kind of claims remind me of the sort of sillier claims that have always been made by new methods that are trying to achieve commercial success. But when I listen to the actual CDs, his method is a very conservative one. He obviously is a charismatic figure, and his students like him, and so on and so forth. But in terms of a revolutionary method, what's revolutionary is that it goes back to the past.
Frequently, linguists make the assumption Michel likes least, that his success is not due to the way he presents the new language to students, but is a result simply of the force of his personality. The presence and self-confidence, maybe, that had enabled him to extract confessions from Nazi war criminals. Herbert Morris is not convinced his method would transfer to the schoolroom.
The parts that could be replicated are the parts of the method that relate to relaxation, to breaking the language down into its simplest components. And I think what's accounting for the success is Michel himself, coupled with this aspect of one-on-one, being there with him and with that one other person, and the constant reinforcement.
It's difficult to find a student who hasn't come away from Michel's teaching feeling highly motivated and somehow very impressed. Yet others have responded quite differently to the character and story of Michel Thomas.
I was surprised sometimes at the hostility that he seems to engender among certain people, not just the educational establishment, but he seems to sort of rub everybody up the wrong way, because he won't be the safe person. He will not be the victim. He won't be the nice guy who did this. He always insists on telling the truth as he sees it, and of course this can lead to some very uncomfortable moments.
Michel always seems to leave a lasting impression. He still travels the world teaching, but he is never far from some treasured possessions he keeps in his briefcase. They are the last letters written by his mother and aunt to his uncle in America shortly before they were murdered in Auschwitz. Despite the enormous courage he has relied on in his life, he has never been able to read them.
I tried to read them, I couldn't. Which means 2 of those letters I read. I could not read anything else. So I do have them with me. I treasure them. They're part of me, though I cannot read them.
It can be unnerving to people who think these things are all in the past and it's just a movie or something. For Michel, it isn't in the past, and it's not just a movie.
I have a lot of strength, but I don't know if I can do it. After having read 2 of those letters, it tore me. It tore me apart.
Being in concentration camps, being in slave labor camps, escaping, fighting with the resistance, fighting with the American army, the Thunderbirds, being a Nazi hunter with the counterintelligence corps. I mean, this is an extraordinary life to have led as a young man. You've got to remember, this is his formative life. This is how he spent his youth. So it's not surprising that you've got a rather different human being coming out of this. I mean, these were his universities.
It is difficult. There's something else too, which I carry in me. A locked steel box in me, which is filled with tears. And I cannot allow those tears to come out. Therefore, I have not been able to cry ever since the war.
More Than Words was presented by Gwyneth Powell. The producer was Allie Ayres. It was a peer production for BBC Radio 4.